What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and we use books as tools for personal and community growth.
This week, we are reading Pop Song by Larissa Pham, a memoir about love and identity told through discussions of art and music.
This book has some kind of dramatic moments that we'll be talking about that could be considered a spoiler if you care about spoilers and memoirs. This is your official warning that we'll talk about everything. So if you haven't read it, you're definitely welcome to listen in. Just know you will get all the deets that may have been, dramatic narrative moments in the book otherwise.
But honestly, I think this is a great one to come in on if you haven't read it before.
Yeah, I think especially since this is a newer author, I think this is a great opportunity. I found out this book because someone gave like a review of it because I didn't know Larissa Pham as an author before now. And so, yeah, I think listening to podcasts, reading reviews of especially of newer authors that I didn't even know to look for have been really helpful in deciding whether or not I want to buy it. And I did. I, in fact, bought the hardcover book because I'm that committed. And also, I didn't realize there was a paperback available. But there is. I saw on her Twitter, there is paperback available. It is a really pretty book, too. It's got, like, some, like, line painting of a female form. And the title, Pop Song, is, like, it looks like it's painted as well. Mm-hmm. It's very nice. Before we dive into the discussion, though, do you want to give our little shout-outs?
Yeah!
Shout out ourselves.
Plug time. It's time to shout out ourselves. If you like listening to little old us talk about some little old books, can support us for free by rating, reviewing, and subscribing on whatever podcast platform makes your heart happy. If you want to buy some books and maybe support us in the process, if you look down in the show notes, anytime we link to a book, those are affiliate links that will take you to our page on bookshop.org that allows you to purchase books from independent bookstores all over the North America, I think. And we also get a very tiny kickback that helps us buy books for this show. And then if you want to join the book club officially for newsletters, giveaways, we've got a film club series that's very fun where we review like book to TV or book to film adaptations. We've got Pachinko that we just finished last week. That's on there. And we're doing a 100th episode. Yes, 100th episode is coming up this summer. If you want to be a part of all that good stuff and talk about books with us, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv and sign up for like $3 a month and have a good time.
Yeah. So we always invite you listeners to DM us or email us and share your thoughts. And I realized we should probably like share some of those, like when people do reach out, because it's really fun. Yeah. So this is a comment from @Franca_Mosca on Instagram, writing, I discovered you today on a search for a podcast on Elena Ferrante. Terrific episode and looking forward to going through your past episodes. We'll be listening to your future podcasts. Engaging and intelligent book podcast, ! Greetings from Australia. Thank you, Franca.
Hi, Australia.
That was so kind.
Wow.
And we're so excited. And book 4 will be coming eventually. But, Julie and I need at least 6 to 12 months to read each of those Elena Ferrante novels. So thank you, Franca, for listening all the way from Australia.
Look at books bringing people together. That comment made me so happy.
Made
I wanted
my
to cry.
I was like, wow. This is great. So, yeah. I mean, it's the little things, man.
It's the little things.
Okay, so Pop Song by Larissa Pham. I initially learned about this book from a staff pick article on Friction's website. Friction is a literary journal that's super cool. and I really like their work. And now I work there part-time, which is very exciting. But I read this staff pick before I worked there, so it feels full circle. Asmani, one of the staffers, recommended it, and after reading her review, I immediately added it to my, like, TBR list and told Julia, I think we should talk about this on the pod. We were looking for some more nonfiction, some essay to talk about. So it really fit what we wanted to talk about this season. And like too often, I didn't give myself enough time to read it, which is now a reoccurring trend that all of our listeners could point out to me, I'm sure 5 seasons ago, whenever we talk about nonfiction. I'm like, yeah, I just didn't give myself enough time to read this. So I think I need to change my approach. We've got some other nonfiction coming up this season that I'm like, okay, slow and steady wins the race. I gotta read those alongside the fiction so I don't have to jump in and read for like hours to get through a book. But it was nice to dive into this book all week, and it was fun to like completely live in this space and give myself a lot of time to just like soak it all in. What I didn't do, which I'm curious, Julia, to hear from you, is I didn't go look up the art that Pham was writing about. And so that was a really interesting experience, not only because I didn't really have time, but also I really wanted to like stay in the book. And I know when I go and Google things, I go down rabbit holes. And so if I looked up every artist and art critic and theory that Larissa cites in the book, I would spend so long researching before I got back to the book. So I got to really enjoy the art as Larissa talks about it, and then maybe moving forward, I'll go seek out some of those pieces. But I really enjoyed the theory in this book, which we will talk about. What was your experience?
I also did not look up any of the art. Still haven't. Partly because I listened to this as an audiobook at 1.2 speed. Not even 1.5, because that's too fast and it's very overwhelming and I can't process it. But I wanted it a little sped up because I get impatient because they read slower than I do. So anyway, maybe not the best format for consuming this book looking back. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but if I wanted to grasp everything that she was talking about and get a clearer sense of when her ideas began and ended, listening to it was maybe not the best, because when she got into some of the complex theory stuff, I couldn't always follow along, and so, but it sounded really pretty, and so I would just end up like vibing to like it was a poetry reading or something, you know, where it's like, this sounds so lovely, I don't know what she's saying, this is great. It was very relaxing, really beautiful, and I also couldn't tell when one chapter ended and the next one began.
Which is very distinct in the print version.
Yes.
But I'm sure listening to it, yeah, it could just kind of blend together.
Yeah. There were 2 chapters that were very closely related as well. I think one of them was Body of Work, and whichever one was before or after that.
It was Blue, and then Body of Work, and then Crush. I felt Body of Work and Crush were very, like, had similar content from her personal life, but Blue and Body of Work had a lot of similar, like, just in-depth theory discussions. So, depending on what you found similar.
I think it was right around in those 3 chapters, they all kind of blended together. And I mean, they told a very compelling story, but I couldn't quite tell. I was like, are we in a new argument now or not? So, that definitely impacted the feeling that I was left with. It was more of like a vibe than like a specific argument about what she was saying. It left me with a feeling. And I think part of that also was she's very similar to us in certain ways, and she felt like someone I would know in my personal life. So a lot of the things she described, certain things felt extremely relatable and certain things were like totally outside my experience. And so that was an interesting thing to listen to as well. But yeah, I was expecting essays about music, and what I got was essays about art, which I also love. So I ended up really enjoying it, but it took me a minute to figure out, what am I listening to? You know, and then I was in it and I was vibing. And it was lovely. It's a bit harder for me to pick out specific moments or specific arguments that she said, because it's harder to remember. So I think for future nonfiction that's more heady like this, I need to read it, and I need to be able to underline things and star things and like write in the book like I normally do.
I read the last portion of the book sitting outside on a beautiful Chicago early summer day with a glass of Prosecco, and that felt like the absolute best environment to read it in. I think if I would reread this, I would it would be like my weekend beach read or weekend picnic read of like, I'm going to go sit at a cafe or sit under the trees and I'm going to like just delve into one of these chapters and then I'm going to set it aside and I'll pick it up next weekend when I'm just like sitting at a park waiting on a friend and like just kind of absorb it in pieces over a period of time, especially since it does kind of stretch a long period. It covers a year of her life. So it doesn't have the same like propelling memoir narrative of like, I need to know what happens next. It's a lot of like, here's some details and then we're going to sit and think for a while and include some more details. And that's the vibe I want to read it, is with a glass of Prosecco sitting at a picnic table all summer long. But I did take pictures of the book at my beautiful table with the wine situation. So that when we post it on Instagram, it will have the vibes of what I think this book should be, which is also very fascinating because there's a lot of conversations about how we use Instagram as a way to connect and tell stories and all the nuance that our generation thinks of when we post an individual picture knowing who's going to see it.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
I loved it and we're going to get into it. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Larissa Pham.
Yes.
She is an artist and writer who lives in Brooklyn. She is from the Portland area, and she's the daughter of refugees from Vietnam. She attended Yale University, and we read a lot about her young adult life in this book. And there wasn't a ton, especially with newer writers. You don't find like a ton about their like life story yet online. So I just have a few pieces, and a lot of it's in the memoir itself. But yeah, examples of she studied abroad in France and she is a writer and has had copywriting gigs, was a Tumblr girl back in the day. Those things we read about in the book. This book specifically came out in May 2021. The full title is Pop Song, Adventures in Art and Intimacy. And in an interview, Pham mentions that the year in this book covers her life when she was 25 to 26 years old, which is about how old Julie and I are. And this was pre-pandemic. So Pham is like 29 or 30 years old now. So when Julie and I were talking before this, we were like, it feels like she's exactly where we are. And it's like, oh, right. Yeah. The age in her life she's writing about is, in fact, exactly where we are in our own life. No wonder. It feels pretty relatable. Larissa Pham's first publication, or book, I should say, was a novella called Fantasian that was published in 2016. And she writes a lot of other things, including lots of essays and articles that have been published in places like the Paris Review, The Nation, The Village Voice, Guernica Magazine, and Roxane Gay's magazine, Unruly Bodies. And in the acknowledgments of Pop Song, she thanks Roxane Gay for taking a chance on her. And I can't imagine, but Pham's first literary essay ever was published in The Rumpus by Roxane Gay back in 2014.
Wow.
And like, wow, what a way to start your career with that kind of like influence readily available, and pretty incredible. But yeah, those are just kind of high level details, and we'll get a little bit more into her personal story as we discuss the book.
So, quick summary. This book follows, as we stated, Larissa Pham's journey of love, intimacy, and self-discovery centered around a particular relationship, which she describes as feeling very new and different for her, and which has left her feeling very kind of vulnerable and changed. So the individual chapters are centered around certain topics. They're not necessarily in chronological order, but we sort of gather moments from her life, roughly in chronological order, from her first college boyfriend through until the end of the central relationship of the story in her mid to late 20s. And all throughout the book, she seeks to understand certain aspects of herself and her experiences, such as pain or vulnerability or gender or time, through the lens of like art analysis. So she picks apart works of photography or fine art or music or textiles or whatever strikes her fancy. She applies certain interpretive theories to these works of art and then also turns them on herself and sort of finds connecting points. And so the analysis of this art sort of helps her analyze her own story and her relationship to love and intimacy and all that good stuff. So it very much is a story of art and intimacy together.
Wonderful. So since the subtitle of the book is in fact, art and intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to focus our discussion on those two topics. We're going to approach them in reverse order, though. So we'll talk about intimacy first and relationships, and then the art and theory of the book. But all of this is like pretty woven into with each other in the book itself. There isn't like an essay about art and then an essay about her personal life. They're constantly woven together.
Yeah.
I think, especially since we were saying like we resonate with a lot of her personal life story because it just feels similar to our own right now. I think maybe that's part of the reason the intimacy was the first part that I like connected with. But at the same time, it just makes sense that most readers would probably connect with the intimacy side first because it's more human, and then get the art stuff.
We've mentioned the author, she feels like someone that we know. She's, literally our age in this book when she's writing it. Is one of the authors I think that we've covered that feels the most like us, because she's not only our age, but she's our like generation. She's 3 years older than us? And so like our high school and college years sort of overlapped. Like there's just a lot of touch points. The types of things she's interested in. And her career is also very similar, where she's like kind of jumping around and trying different things and making stuff. And like she works in nonprofit for a while and it burns her out. And so she tries being a writer and living in major cities. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, even the purpose of this podcast of using books to grow and understand ourselves and other people.
Yeah.
And like literally the project of this podcast is very similar to this book. We just don't get quite so personal. So it was really fascinating to read such a close reflection of myself and yet someone who's also quite different in terms of personality and taste and history and such.
And I mean, she does talk to her lived experience as a Vietnamese American,
right,
and being a child of the diaspora. So that is definitely something that was like different than mine and Julia's own experiences. You wrote down this quote from chapter 2, which is blue. And I also underlined it in my book, my copy. I've never had a home, only places I've lived. And she writes about how she's basically just like claimed New York as her own. I think this was not in the book itself. I think it was in an interview I read with her where, there's sometimes this conversations of like what makes a New Yorker and like who's coming in and like claiming the city as their own, but they're not quote unquote from there. Yeah, reading that interview, which we'll link in the show notes, I resonated with some parts of it too, because I feel like I've also in my adult life kind of adopted a city to call my own. Difference being that, my family aren't refugees in this country. And so that's very different too. But the experience of like, I don't really have one singular place that is home to me, but the list of places I've lived.
Quite long.
Quite long.
Between the two of us, we've covered a lot of ground. Yeah. I really related to the way that she sort of runs away from stuff, She's like, she tries to change herself by moving to a new location. The very first chapter, she talks about running and this feeling of like, I have to get out of this room. And then also she does that with travel, where she's just like, I have to be somewhere else right now. I can't be here. But she always ends up discovering, this quote is also from chapter 2, the problem with leaving a place is eventually you arrive somewhere else where you have to refigure yourself. And I'm like, ain't that the truth? That is literally like the story of my adult life is like, when I go to college, finally it'll, or when I go to Chicago and like live as a free adult, or like, oh, when I move to Europe, and it's just like never what you're looking for, because you're there. It's always you. And just, I think that was part of what I resonated with so strongly, was like her solution to a lot of things in her personal life is to travel, move, and try a new place. And on some level, it does work. She has new experiences. She looks at things from a different angle and like, but she's also left back with herself that she has to reconfigure and figure out. And yeah, I was like, same girl. I understand.
Yeah. I definitely resonated with the solo travel experience when she wants to go to Mexico City and she's just quit her job that she's like really burnt out from. And this is like her kind of impulsive, like, I'm going to just get away. And she kind of builds it up in her head, like, I'm going to do so much writing. I'm going to come back maybe like a different person, like a lot of weight on this like trip. And then her roommate goes with her for part of the time and she's like super thankful because she was actually kind of scared to be alone. And then the central relationship of this book, this person who's addressed as you for the entirety of the book, comes to stay with her the second part of the trip. I found that really interesting too, because I feel like I also build up all these, especially when I'm like traveling. Like, for example, I'm going to be flying to see Julia soon, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to have like hours by myself, like in an airport and like on a plane, and like, who will I be? And I'm like, I'm probably going to watch 4 movies and fall asleep. Like, I'm not going to get anything done. I'm not going to write any like essays or poems that I'm gonna like change myself with. And even then, like, I'm like, yeah, Julie and I are just gonna kind of do our own thing, and we'll both be working and writing, but then we'll hang out. And I'm like, yeah, you'll be working and writing and hanging out, and that's exactly what you do here in Chicago. Yeah. Just like, it's just in a different location. Like, you're not gonna be anyone different.
I'm just like transplanting our pandemic lifestyle to Belgium. That's it. So should we talk about this you?
Yes. This central character who we actually get the most from when they're in long distance, like moments where they're not together. You mentioned and you identified something that kind of escaped me when I was reading it. The way that the author addresses this you kind of plays around with time in some ways.
Yeah. So early on, this you figure is just brought up in the future tense, out of context, where it's just like, you will do this, or like, later you will tell me this. It's, you know, it's related to whatever the topic of the essay is, whatever the topic of the chapter is, but we sort of get the relationship in bits and pieces, and it's sort of in future tense until we get to when the relationship is actually happening. And then it's in present/past tense, and then it ends. And so the verbs really like warp the story around this sort of central pivot point of this one like year-long relationship. And everything in the author's life that she puts in the book ends up getting interpreted through art, but also through the lens of this relationship, you know, how she was different before, how the relationship changed her, how she thinks about other things are connected, you know, sort of in hindsight. It's really unusual to see in a memoir to have a specific person that you're addressing in different verb tenses. You know, usually it's like, you don't necessarily always go out of order, but it's generally in order, and it's generally in first person. And it's like, I am telling you, the reader, what happened to me. But instead, this story is essentially being told to this partner, this ex. So yeah, there's a lot of intimacy in having that, such a direct address that, yeah, it feels very personal to read, way more than like a regular memoir, which are already quite personal.
As you were kind of explaining this, and I was like, oh, right, that was what happened. It made me think of it kind of like the first few chapters are giving the reader a background on Larissa Pham, while also kind of like, these are the stories that I was telling my partner about myself. Maybe not in as much detail, but kind of like, this story came up and this story came up, and I was vulnerable and I shared this. Because when Larissa is vulnerable with the reader is about the time that she starts getting really vulnerable with her partner about her experience with sexual assault.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting too, because I think there's moments where Pham kind of acknowledges that she is like writing the story of their relationship, both in the fact that she is literally writing a story about their relationship, but also when she's kind of coming to terms with why things didn't work out for them, it was partially because she was trying to create the story she wanted to have in a relationship from the get-go, and then realizing like actually living life is different than writing a story of how you think things should be. And so I felt like the form of the book really matched the form of how she talked about their relationship. It just like all meshed really well, which I think is what really pulls me in as this being like a whole book and not a collection of essays, is because of that. Not only do like some parts literally you need to read the other section to fully understand another one, but the way it all kind of like ties together.
That's a good point about the way that she's literally writing this book when they're falling in love. Like, there are crucial moments when, you know, the moments when they're long distance are when she's at a writer's retreat writing this book. Like an early version of this book before it became what it is now. And so, yeah, it's very fascinating that she's like falling in love with this you over the phone while she's at a writer's retreat writing this, essentially the story of this relationship. And so it's like, it all sort of converges. And yeah, I mean, we pulled a couple quotes so you can kind of hear how it sounds, but the second person you really breaks down the usual boundary of, I'm the storyteller, you're the person listening, I'm going to tell you what you get to hear, and that's it. Whereas, like, it feels like we're being brought into, like, her private conversations with this person, or, like, her diary or something. Yeah, it's like, extremely intimate. So, one of the quotes that I really liked about the experience of falling in love when they're talking on the phone, she's at the writer's retreat, she says, "You could have read me the dictionary, and I would have felt just as close to you."
I liked this one. "In the morning, you make us breakfast. You like your coffee strong, your eggs runny. Moving gracefully through your kitchen with its harlequin tiles. You're going to know me, I think. I want to give that up. I am willing." And this is when, it was the very end of a chapter, kind of the turning point where Larissa's like, oh, this relationship is different. And I think I am ready to be vulnerable with someone in a new way. I also love this passage because it reminds me so much of my own relationship. That is also how my partner enjoys breakfast. And that was so, like, formative in our early relationship, was, like, making breakfast together. So, I don't know, just, like, warm feelings. I also, okay, this is, like, an idea I was having as we are talking now, so
Okay,
it might not come out right, but I feel like the use of you re-emphasizes to me, the reader, that this is strictly the author's point of view of the life events. So I feel like in other memoirs, and I think we talked about this way, 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 way back in our episode Educated by Tara Westover, there's like a note at the end and in some notes throughout that Tara's like, my brothers remember this differently, or we don't know exactly what happened, but this is what I remember. Where you kind of get pulled out for a moment to be reminded, like, this is one person's interpretation of what actually happened. But a lot of memoirs are written in a very storytelling way of, like, you know, if I was writing a memoir and I was like, Julia always felt like, I don't know, I'm going to make up something.
What did I always feel, Victoria?
I dominated the kitchen and always burnt toast. And she hated me for it. I don't burn toast. It's the exact
Victoria,
opposite.
I burn toast, according to Victoria. She likes lightly golden bread. She doesn't even like it to be crispy.
Yeah, see, this is a terrible example. I'm not doing this well because I'm on the fly. I'm, like, trying to make it up. Like, if I was writing a memoir and there's, like, a fictitious, I don't know, Steve in my memoir, and I write about how Steve thought of me or didn't think of me or Steve treated me poorly. The way it's written when you name a character, I feel like is almost stronger, that you're like, oh, I totally, like, that's the way it was. And you believe the narration a bit more. Whereas I feel like this is me just coming up with this right now, but I feel like the use of you is a really constant reminder of, like, this is one side of the story, and we never get this unnamed you's their side of the story. I think maybe because if I was saying to Julia, like, hey, you said this, blah, 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 Julia could actually come back and be like, oh, you know, I remember that differently. You know, like, it sounds like you're in the conversation with them versus being told about things after the fact. And I think we say things differently when we talk to someone than when we talk about someone, especially when there's difficult emotions like a breakup. Even though the author is super vulnerable and I think very eloquent in, like, naming what is happening to her and what she's participating in and how she has changed, she doesn't, like, overstep to, like, give the reader an impression that, like, oh, and now we know who this guy is and we know why he was, you know, not helpful in the relationship, or, like, he didn't love her back the way she wanted him to. I don't know. It feels more open, and I feel much more like, I don't even know who this you is. Yeah. I have sympathy for him. I have sympathy for her, but I'm not really, like, in a place to take sides because I only heard one side of the story. I don't know. Did I land anywhere with that?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because the you figure felt very obscured and distant to me. It felt very constructed. It didn't feel like a real person in a lot of ways, because they weren't named and
details have been removed to protect the innocent.
Yeah, and it felt much, you know, you can sort of see the author's hand in creating her idea of this figure.
So sometimes we talk about how this you is kind of amorphous and not, fully detailed out. It reminds me of like, this is a little more direct, but sometimes like subtweets, or people are like talking about something, or like when we would post back in the day on like Facebook or Tumblr, like about someone, but like not giving a lot of details. Like, we might even have written things back in the day of, like, I don't know, addressing this you without naming them in, like, forums and blogs and whatnot in the early internet days. And this really ties in, I think, because this is the most Tumblr book we've ever read. And Larissa even writes about her experience on Tumblr and explicitly shouts out her Tumblr community in the acknowledgements. She writes, "To everyone I wrote with, read, and reblogged on Tumblr from 2009 to 2014, this is for you. I hope you see all of us in it." Yeah, more than just, oh, this is someone who says they spent a lot of time on Tumblr. It feels like something from someone who spent a lot of time on Tumblr.
Well, and that's how she got started as a writer. She wrote a diary, like personal confessional blog on Tumblr and got a huge following. That's like how she started writing when she was in college. And so her style is very, very informed by the Tumblr style, where, and I'll do my best to describe it because you know it when you see it, but it's extremely serious, and it is trying to really grasp the true depth of all your feelings of life in general by drawing all these connections between different artistic references and personal details. So like this is not an essay format, but something that's quite popular is you'll create a sort of quote and art collage for your favorite story or your favorite character or your favorite ship or something, where you'll have quotes out of context from different authors, different poets, along with art pieces and famous references, and you sort of create this little collage that all works in conversation with each other to achieve this sort of certain feeling, this very deep feeling that just feels very true, even though there's no like argument being made necessarily, and it reminds you of the experience of this particular character or whatever. A lot of Tumblr essays are someone trying to get other people to understand just how important or how deep or how serious something is. And like this book is a very, very sophisticated, refined version of that, I think, where like you really see it in sort of the concluding scene where she's in an art museum in Shanghai, trying to run away from and process the breakup and, figure out where she's at emotionally and personally and everything. And also analyzing the art pieces that she's seeing on the walls and giving, like, the backstory of the creators and stuff. And so it's like the two, it's the art and the intimacy, the personal story and the theory and analysis sort of coming together in this one moment that's sort of very climactic and emotional and sort of wraps up the whole story. And yeah, I feel like it's very Tumblr. Yeah. And she does it very, very well.
Yeah. Here's an example where she's writing about how Tumblr interacted with her experience of theory. This is in the chapter called Body of Work. By then, it had become fashionable among my cohort online, young, feminist, self-aware, sad girls of color, to talk about sex using the language of critical theory. The theory itself wasn't new, but its sudden accessibility enabled by Tumblr's sharing culture meant its popularity was cresting. We read Edward Said's Orientalism, Chandra Talpade Mohanty's Critique of Western Feminism, and Gayatri Spivak on the subaltern. I don't know what subaltern means. Sorry, that was a pull away from the reading of the text. I realized I don't know that word.
Yeah, Spivak. The subaltern, I think a term that has already gone out of style, but it's a different way of describing someone who's very marginalized in society, but it's describing it in different spatial terms. So marginalized means that there's a center and a margin, and so you're on the outside. Whereas subaltern implies that you're sort of underneath the surface. You occupy the same space, but you're sort of hidden in plain sight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I continue on. We posted block quotes online and we blogged one another with our interpretations of the text and the ways we saw applied to our own experiences. I was drawn to the potency of the language, by how this kind of theory necessarily looped in on itself, grappling with the limits of speech, describing ways of being, and reacting in staggering contours that nevertheless, at times, rang emotively true to the experiences I'd felt. I admit this is how I've always treated theory, panning for the parts that feel true to life, looking less to challenge my perspective than to find new ways of articulating it.
Yeah, the minute that she started talking about, that was when I feel like it really clicked into place that I know who this person is, and it, really resonated with me in terms of like why I'm so drawn to certain parts of academia or literature or art or like just thinking about stuff with other people. It can seem very distant and, exclusive maybe from the outside, but a lot of the times it's like you stumbling around finally finding the language for something that describes your own experience among people who think like you for the first time, and that's like really powerful, and you feel like you can really plumb the depths of reality in ways with these new tools, in ways that you never really were able to before, and it's very exciting. Before we get into the theory, though, let's get into the art, because there's a lot of great art in here.
Okay, we talked earlier about how we didn't go look up these pieces, and I want to note another thing, is that this book doesn't have, like, very poor black and white copies of these pieces of art, which I really appreciate, because I think often in books about art, they will include a small image of that art piece. And then sometimes it like ruins it for me, especially when she's talking so much about like what art really has it for her. And she even goes into a discussion about representation and copies of art pieces and whatnot. So anyways, I thought that was delightful that there wasn't just like, and here's a bunch of small images that may be lower quality of these art pieces for reference. They also may not have been able to get the printing rights to do that because she talks about a lot of contemporary artists.
But she really appreciates you can't quite reproduce the effect of something somewhere else or at a different time, different place, different medium, whatever. And she's like constantly kind of grappling with that in several ways. One of the art references that I think stuck with me the most was her discussion of the installation artist Kusama, that's her last name, who her art installations are extremely popular all over the world. And I think if you saw a picture of one on Instagram, you'd be like, oh, I absolutely know what you're talking about, even if you've never been to one yourself. There are these rooms, sometimes small, sometimes bigger, that play with depth through either the dots on everything or hanging lights with mirrors. And anyone who visits these installations like absolutely posts a picture of themselves in it on Instagram. Especially the ones with the lights, it looks like it's just them alone in an endless room. And those are very popular on Instagram. And so they get sort of translated and people are like, oh yeah, it's one of those light rooms. And people don't really know anything about the art itself or its origins. And in a lot of ways, the installations end up becoming functionally kind of one of those, those really creepy, like they travel to like different warehouses and they have different themes. Like there was the ice cream museum or something.
I went to one that was like from Refinery 29. It was like 29 rooms or something like that. There was some of the installations were really cool and some of them were just like, this is a backdrop for an Instagram photo. This is not interactive art.
Yeah, like they set it up as interactive art, but it's essentially just a place for people to take Instagram pictures. And it removes the activity or the depth or the meaning of the place. And it exists to be on Instagram. And that's what ends up happening to a lot of Kusama's installations. But actually, I learned something new from this book where Larissa Pham talks about her. Kusama has actually been institutionalized for mental illness for a long time. And that actually the lack of depth that she puts in her pieces, it's not just like a theoretical idea. It's like what the world sometimes looks like to her. It's how she experiences things. She tries to make it physical so other people can see it. And it's like her reaching out, trying to show people what it's like for her. And it just gets totally lost in iteration over iteration. And I had absolutely no idea. And the author this is in a separate section, but she talks about about having to decide which of her traumas she wishes to monetize, which was just like such a stab in the gut. But it made me think of Kusama as like she's trying to turn her experiences and her pain into art, and it's incredibly successful, but it's also kind of misunderstood.
Yeah, it seems like I would love to hear Larissa Pham on like a panel talking about like trauma in art.
Yeah.
Like, I think that'd be so fascinating. It gave me a lot to think about, the idea of like monetizing your traumas. And in a way, I mean, that's what Larissa Pham is doing here, is writing about her trauma and writing about the experience of writing about trauma. Yeah, it seems like this constant conversation. When you create art from your pain, sometimes it can be a really great way to move towards healing, can be a way towards advocacy for others who might suffer or survive similar situations you've been through. But also, like, what does that do to the artist? And how much do you have to just keep writing about your traumas instead of writing about other things? It makes me think of Austin Channing Brown, who has kind of refocused her online writing away from the anti-racism work that she's been doing for years. Not because that stuff isn't important, but because she's like, I am tired. Yeah. I'm tired of constantly having to be the one that everyone turns to when something happens again and again and again. And I want to write about things that bring me joy. And so her latest kind of writing series has all been about joyful experiences, particularly of Black women, but women of color and people of color in many other situations, and sharing those stories. And I think her whole like media company now is a little more refocused on like joyful storytelling. And reading that bit of Pham's writing about monetizing your traumas made me think a lot about Austin Channing Brown.
If we're talking about medium, she talks a lot about photography, and she defines it as moving light from place to place, which I absolutely loved, right? Where you're trying to capture it and put it somewhere, but then it becomes light somewhere else, and just again and again. I feel like the way she talks about photography is kind of a great example of how she gives a very experiential view to art. So she talks about the way light travels and how it affects your experience of time and the environment that you're in, and like how blue is always the farthest color away from you because of the way that light travels. And so like you might be driving, she talks about driving in New Mexico, right? And the mountains look blue when they're really far away and they're really pretty and you like want to go there. But once you get there, it's the same color as everywhere else and you haven't gone as far, it's not what you expected, and now the blue is far away again. You know, so then she uses that to talk about that idea, that quote that I mentioned earlier, right, of how, like, you can try to run away to somewhere else, but you never really leave you and your situation and the thoughts that are in your head and your circumstances, and, like, how eventually you have to, like, sit with all your feelings and, like, figure them out. There's this always kind of elusive blue space.
And then she ties this into so many elements of her book. So the next chapter is about crushes, and she talks about, you know, that space between action and inaction of wanting to be with someone, but like knowing that once you do share your feelings or start a relationship, like the crush is gone, and that's kind of this elusive idea of a hypothetical relationship, and it's that blue of the mountains, but as you get closer you realize you're your same person. You know, there's this hypothetical future, you know, beautiful relationship with this person that you have a crush on, but in reality, once you get close enough to have that relationship, you are still yourself. You have not changed, though you can be changed over time and by different experiences, but like the moment between the relationship that could be to I have now professed my interest in you, you're not changing. You're still yourself in that moment.
And she also applies it very practically, which she does, like I was talking about the art exhibit example, right? She applies it very practically in the story, in the central narrative, because while she and this figure of you are long distance, they have a shared Instagram where they try to show each other what they're seeing. And they both have a login, And no one else follows it. Like, it's just for the two of them to see.
I thought the Instagram account was really interesting, and it kind of like ties together a lot of the sections as well, and re-emphasizes that like when you're further away from something, you might have ideas of what it looks like. In the last chapter, reflecting on their shared Instagram account, she writes, "Maybe that was the fate I'd set us up for when I first made it, as something we'd only use when we were apart. It stood for a reason that we'd have to be apart to use it." And I don't know if it's like a one-to-one connection with the idea of blue, but there's still this constant thinking and interaction of how things look and how they feel when you're close to it versus far away. Yeah. I thought the Instagram account was cool too. Again, going back to how we relate as someone who is very similar in age, because it's a very literary book. But the fact that like Tumblr and Instagram are like key art forms and mediums and communication tools is really cool, and I think very relevant for our generation. Like what you think about when you try to post a picture, knowing who's going to see the picture. Like how many of us have like stopped from posting something because like, oh, well, so-and-so will see it and they might think this, or posting it specifically so I know this person will see it. The time I roll my eyes, but I know we all probably have done it at some point, but my friends being like, yeah, I just posted to see if he or to see if she would like the photo, so I knew they were on their phone or something, like kind of ridiculous things we did, but also sometimes meaningful things. Like she talks about like trying to find the right picture to post this to this account so he will think a certain thing or see a certain thing the way she does.
I feel like Instagram is a great example, and maybe social media in general, of the way that we use it to try and capture ourselves and who we are. Like, actually, I was just sharing this with you the other day about the way that millennials communicate is multimedia, It's like audio and visual and written, and there's all these different components, and like, we use Tumblr and we use Instagram to try and like capture the essence of ourselves and of reality, and to try and kind of put it together and understand it. But the translation of the mediums, you kind of lose something, and it never quite translates what you want it to. Someone else is going to see something very different.
So we've talked about the art.
Yes.
And of course, we had to start dabbling into the theory, but I guess we can spend a little more time here talking about theory because we love that.
Yes. This was one of the first books that I read where the author explicitly stated that she loves theory. It felt very like, oh, I didn't think we were allowed to say that. You know what I mean? Right. Even though we have literally said it on this podcast. But I didn't think we were allowed to, because it's painted as this kind of, I don't know, like maybe elitist or like it's difficult to decipher sometimes. Some theory is just batshit crazy or bonkers or indecipherable. Like, it's not always, I mean, if you've ever tried to read Derrida, like, just don't. Stop. Put it down, turn around, walk away. Like, he's not worth your time. He's an asshole. I feel like that's what people think of. And I didn't, it feels kind of weird to be like, but I kind of enjoy it. And I like thinking through those kinds of things. And she embraces how much she loves it. And she talks about how, like, she finds all these she uses it to help her understand herself and find these through lines and themes between herself and the art. So, like, she'll analyze how a photographer depicts pain and intersperse that with her own experiences of pain. And those two sides together sort of help her find some sense of meaning. So her own pain informs her interpretation of the photograph, and interpreting the photograph and experiencing it helps inform her own understanding of her own pain. And she sort of flips back and forth. And yeah, like we've talked about before, theory is just like a way of seeing. It's a lens, it's a perspective that you can take. And so she really likes putting those on in a way to help herself maybe get some perspective and help her understand herself.
So, okay, here's an example where I think she like ties together like what she's thinking about with theory. And you see her interact with it in a way that feels very like personable. So she talks about like where her and a friend went to look at paintings together. She writes, "This is one of my favorite games to play alone, or better yet, with someone else who also wants to look for it. walking through galleries, pointing out drawings and paintings. This has it, we say to each other. This doesn't. This one has it. And so then she writes about what she means when she says it. She writes it's kind of a motivity, a strength of gesture or performance that comes through the work so strongly I don't have to know what the piece is about in order to feel what it's trying to say to me. And it's like a very hard thing to describe, but you're kind of like getting to it. It's like, oh, it's a feeling. It's just kind of like a resonance, you just like connect with something. And then this is when she brings in Walter Benjamin. So Walter Benjamin theorized on a property similar to it. He called it an aura of a piece of art, written in response to the technological innovation that allowed people to make prints and perfect replicas of artwork. He suggested, quote, even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element, its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. And she goes on to talk about Benjamin, and then she kind of like gives her own response back of like what she thinks she agrees with, or she thinks maybe she sees differently, because she's like, well, but like that recording of the James Blake song is only a video on the internet, but I feel like it has it in a way that even the studio recording doesn't seem to have. And then she talks about the kind of the added aura, the itness of the comments on a YouTube video that make her feel like connected. And so this is really interesting because she's taking Benjamin, who's like an art critic of this big name in theory, and not just like applying his theory, but like examining it and thinking about it and talking about whether or not she agrees with it in this specific instance. And maybe it's not the most approachable book in the world if you've never like engaged with theory. It might feel a little over your head, but I do think it's a very personable approach, which I think Julie and I really relate to, is the way we approach this podcast. We're not necessarily quoting theorists time and again, but we're like picking and choosing which ones we like to use in certain instances. And then that Larissa Pham feels comfortable enough to even say like, well, I think maybe this theory isn't exactly nail on the head. He's got it. She like engages in the conversation in almost an academic way, but it's still a very intimate discussion of her own life.
She articulated well, I think, something you and I both have experienced, where certain theory, talking about why something is the way it is, or kind of describing a different way of understanding the world, or like things that we make. Sometimes you read something and it's like the first time that someone has put language to the world as you experience it. And not just language, but like the type of language that we associate with legitimacy. You know what I mean? Because we associate academic language with this person knows what they're talking about, and they're, if not completely right, they're at least partially right. You know what I mean? They have authority.
They've like studied this. They've researched this. They can make a very skillful argument to argue for this.
Yes. And often that language is used to criticize or to say like, oh, your opinion's not valid because this is the right way to read this book or whatever. That I feel like maybe that's how some people associate it. But there is also theory out there that can legitimize your outsider perspective. Like I remember reading feminist theory for the first time and feeling validated that like these certain white male novelists who are sort of lauded as like these incredible classical writers, like they've created classics that you have to read because they're so good. And I hated them. And why do I hate them? They make me angry. I don't know. They make me so angry and uncomfortable. And you read feminist theory and they're like, yeah, because of their attitude towards this and the language that they use and the context that they come from. And like this text is very misogynistic in the way that they use their symbols or whatever, you know what I mean? And it like, you feel validated and you're like, oh yeah, there's someone out there representing me and I have a valid way of looking at things myself. Larissa Pham talks about that. For example, in the Tumblr quote, or the quote about Tumblr that you cited earlier of like her experience as an Asian American woman, with parents who were refugees and stuff, being at college at Yale and the world opening up for the first time and reading these texts and feeling like, that's me. That's my way of seeing,
Yeah, and she like kind of what she calls that freedom in articulation, and how theory can be a source of freedom by being able to define and say things that, like you were saying, Julia, are legitimatized by the academic world. And because with theory, you can get so specific to a very specific lens that you're looking at things through. And you can find those words for those very specific experiences, which I thought was really interesting. And yeah, I also resonate with, because I feel like studying theory, specifically literary theory and philosophy in college, really opened up my own understanding of the world and gave me kind of legs to stand on and be like, yeah, how I'm interpreting this text is legitimatized because there's a whole world of people who are doing similar things through theory, that there aren't books that are, quote unquote, off limits from reading it through different lenses. It opens you up to the freedom of understanding the world in different ways.
This entire book feels like a conversation that we would have, like, over drinks. Maybe Larissa Pham is there, maybe not, but I'm just like, this feels that, like, I feel so subsumed in the whole book. It was hard to kind of take an outsider look and be like, how do I break this down into little pieces to figure out how to talk about it? You can apply all of these thoughts to everything, everywhere, It's like she kind of has her own way of seeing that we really resonate with.
So, for people who enjoyed reading this book, what would you recommend they read next?
First, I would say watch Nanette by Hannah Gadsby, which is technically, I say with air quotes, a stand-up special. You do laugh occasionally, but it's sort of her manifesto on, like, art and humor and self-exploitation for other, like what we talked about, which of your traumas are you going to monetize? It's literally about that. It's so good. And she uses art, because Hannah Gadsby was an art history major, and so she uses art to talk about pain. It's really, really good. Go watch it. And then also the book kind of reminded me of How I Became a Tree by Sumana Roy, because it's sort of a memoir / cultural analysis, kind of all in one. But they have very different tones and contexts and stuff.
Two books that I was thinking of. One was And Then We Grew Up by Rachel Friedman. And a little bit of Pop Song is also about Larissa Pham's journey as a creator. She writes about her experiences painting and how she wished she was a musician and her life as a writer. And that's just kind of offered up as, like, some framework to understand why she is traveling to these places and what she's doing for her job and how it's impacting her. And Then We Grew Up is much more of a close look at people's experiences of being creative people and pursuing careers. And we talked about it on the podcast. And it was also a book that I felt like this person really just, it's too close to home sometimes in a very good way, in a way that I feel very seen, because I felt very similar to the writer of And Then We Grew Up, which is also kind of a memoir style. Additionally, this is a graphic memoir about the Vietnamese American experience called The Best We Can Do by T. Bui. So if you are not very familiar with the Vietnam War and the impact on Vietnamese people who immigrated to America, it's a really good, like, introduction. It has one of the best examples that I've seen of, like, teaching history through a graphic memoir, because T. Bui is like, here's a brief history, a brief incomplete history, just to, like, get you up to speed to understand what this conflict is. Yes, so very different in many ways, but also Vietnamese American memoir experience. Cool. Currently obsessed. There are a lot of things. We were just talking about how many albums are dropping lately.
Dude.
These are the things that we're obsessed with that are bringing us joy. Julia, take it away.
2 albums that came out since we recorded last time. Raw Data Feel by Everything Everything. This is, I think, my favorite album of theirs ever. It's so good. And then Kendrick Lamar's, like, supposedly final album ever.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be his swan song.
He's, like, retiring?
Yeah. He's closing his label. He's retiring from music. Yeah. But it's called Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Mixed reviews, like, critically very acclaimed, I think, because it's been 5 years since his last album. And it's supposed to be his last one. They're very, very, very high expectations, and people put a lot of hopes on it. So I think some people were disappointed. Some people love it. I really enjoy it. I feel like I'm not a person to be, like, a critical rap expert. It's extremely personal. It's very confessional, and he covers some controversial topics, and it's different from his previous styles, but I think he really nailed it. And then I finally got around to watching Russian Doll season 2, and holy moly, it was very, very, very good. And I definitely cried at the end. It's kind of all wacky and time travel-y, but it's also like about your own family history and trauma and your past and your relationship with your mother, and it's, oh my god. How about you?
Talking about relationships with parents, Everything Everywhere All at Once. If you have not seen the movie, go see it. Julia might fly to a different country to go see it because they have it in Belgium.
I'm struggling, guys.
Yes. But it's my new favorite movie. It's amazing. And Harry Styles' new album, Harry's House, just dropped today, and my Instagram has been kind of blowing up with it all morning, and I haven't had a chance to listen. So I downloaded it. I have a flight later today, and that's immediately what I'm going to do, is listen to it. And I've decided that my vibe this summer is flowy pants, because they kind of go with everything and work for a lot of different kinds of climates. Because if it is a little chilly, you're in pants. But if it's a little too hot, they're breathable.
Truly ideal. All right. Happy summer, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at bookclubwithjv, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Febland. Until next time, happy reading.